there's a great danger we see it all through history, that the way in which you settle one war can, if you're not careful, lead to a bigger war later, because it leaves both sides with an incentive to go back to fighting, a humiliated side that needs to recover its dignity and territory, and a victorious side that thinks it can come back for more. And so there's a huge danger of this here, that this is the prelude to a wider war in later years. And Trump and his team are not really showing the awareness of that. So that's the biggest worry in this whole thing.
Call this a leaders panel, and we want William and Kezia to assess Keir Starmer's leadership on Ukraine. He was the most vocal of European leaders at the meeting yesterday. He was first out the blocks to offer troops to help keep the peace, assuming one comes out of the Russian and American meetings. And he was the one who articulated the need for America to guarantee Ukraine's security. He also wants to be the bridge between America and Europe. So is he being an active leader? Is active the right direction? William, I want to start with you on this. I mean, I've read your column today. I'm interested in whether you think this is a logical strategy by Keir Starmer. Effectively, he's saying out loud all of the right things, potentially, the things that many people would like him to say. But whether he can back it up is another question.
Well, that's exactly right. That's my point in my column. He is doing the right things and saying the right things. And I think everything he said should be welcomed and supported. But then the real test is actually doing it, because if we're going to say, well, the Britain will put troops into Ukraine as part of a security guarantee against a future war, along with other countries, that would have to be quite a lot of troops with a lot of backup. And straight away, you need quite a seriously bigger British army, on top of all the other pressures on defense spending. So don't promise that unless you're then really going to go about being able to supply it. It would be my first piece of advice. And then he's been quite clear and quite right to say this only works at all if the United States is a backstop, is standing behind European forces that would be deployed in Ukraine. It's not at all clear, of course, that the United States under President Trump would be willing to supply that. And that's one of the things he will no doubt try to persuade the president of when he goes to Washington, apparently next week. So, so here, this is the right thing to do, but if it can't be followed up with British defense spending and American commitment, then it would be a dangerous thing to do, because it would be giving the illusion that there is a peacekeeping force that could be put in place when it actually wouldn't be in reality. So right direction, but quite risky, very risky, if he doesn't follow up with the necessary actions.
Kezia, do you think he had any other alternative options here, Keir Starmer?
No, and I think this is arguably Keir Starmer at his best. I think his temperament is absolutely right for this type of role on the world stage. I think when it comes to questions of leadership, arguably the harder job is the one he's going to have to play, making the case for this at home, domestically, not least for all the reasons that William has outlined around having to increase defence spending to materialise a lot of the promises that will be made, hopefully in the coming weeks. Convincing people in the United Kingdom that now is the moment to spend more on defence, on the army, on all the resources required to deliver that sustained peace in Ukraine, whilst there are such issues at home to do with the NHS and living standards and all the rest of it, is going to be a hard sell to the public. It is the right argument to make. I'm full square behind him in doing it, but let's not suggest for a second it's going to be an easy one.
William, do you think, because Kezia's point there is essentially we're going to have to start almost from scratch making this argument to the public. And in many ways, you could argue that successive governments have failed to argue strongly enough for defence. We're on about 2.3% of spend of GDP now, aiming at 2.5. But we spoke to a former director of the CIA today. In fact, pretty much every single guest we've had on the programme who hasn't been a member of the government in this country has said you need to be looking at 3, 4, maybe even 5%. Did the previous government fail on that score?
Well, the situation has changed in the way we used to spend 4%, and right to the mid-1990s, this country spent over 3% of GDP on defense. And then, of course, the Cold War came to an end, and so it literally hasn't been necessary most of the time since then. In the last few years, we've entered a new period of world history that, again, requires much stronger defenses, much more resilience in countries. There's far more danger of war than there was 10 or 20 years ago. So I wouldn't say the last government failed. I'd say the world changed during the time that government was in. Now, as they were going out in the last election, Rishi Sunak's government, they committed to raise defense spending up to 2030 to 2.5%. I think if they'd won the election, they would have to do much more than that. And I think the Labour Party will just have to do more.
Is that quite right, though? Because although the world did change, I think the direction of travel has been clear for quite some time. And the underinvestment in defence has happened over a number of years too. And as we all know, defence procurement and planning takes 5, 10, 20 years maybe to come to fruition. There's an argument that the Tories saw it coming, they just didn't do anything. Yes,
there is. And actually, I was... avid readers of my Times column, well, a couple of years ago, I was writing that this had to be taken so that we had to change the mindset on defense. So yes, I have some sympathy with that, but nevertheless, it's in recent years that the world has changed. And you're right, there's a long time lag on big military procurement. There's something else, though, now where there isn't a long time lag, which is technology is moving on rapidly. Artificial intelligence is merging with defense equipment. Mass production of things like drones is possible in a very short time. And so there's a whole sector of innovation in defense, which we have to make sure this country is a very good home for that. And that could be done quickly because all the bits are there for that. Although we're strong in AI, we're strong in innovative companies, and we need to get them going in this whole defense sector very quickly now.
Kezia, you made the case that this is Starmer at his best. Is there a danger this becomes Starmer at his worst in that he's very good in the abstract? He's very good at the theory of this. We need to get Europe together. We need to get a backstop from the US. But actually, Europe has come together yesterday and at least half of them said they're not interested, very clearly. Germany's not interested, Spain's not interested, Poland's not interested, Italy's not interested. And America couldn't be less interested in Europe. So actually, he's very good on the theory. And if you wrote it down in a flow chart, it would be very good. Backstop, European unity, increased defence spending. But we don't live in a flowchart. We live in reality. And I just wonder whether this is a classic example of Starmer being Starmer and actually not having the charisma or the force, or maybe no one would have the charisma or the force to get this done. But there's a very strong chance he definitely doesn't have that.
So I think it's far too early to tell. And I think for now, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. And that being, he's doing all of the right things. William and I are saying he's doing all of the right things to make the best possible case for this. Let's not pretend it's entirely within his control, though, right? It does require other European players to play their part. We know that Macron wants to do his bit, and we'll see what happens in the event of the German elections this coming weekend. It feels like that'll be quite a critical moment in terms of establishing any degree of European unity on this question. Just going back to the issue around, the extent to which the Conservatives can be blamed for this. I'm just so conscious of having heard so many army generals in the past few years, people like Sir Richard Dannett on the airwaves saying not just that defence spending was too low under the last government, but it was so low that the fundamental ability to upscale quickly was taken away. For me, that's the sort of criminal act here, is that it's been bared back to the bones to such an extent it will be very difficult to get the armed forces back up to the state that they need to be with any great sense of urgency.
Yeah, and Putin invaded Georgia in 2008 and invaded Crimea in 2014. So this is not entirely brand new. Just before we move off the subject, William, just on Donald Trump, what do you make of the Versailles 2.0? The idea that he's not really willing to do anything for Ukraine other than take mineral wealth from it, and regards Ukraine effectively as a vanquished country, vanquished by a stronger, better Russia. That's how he talks. He talks about how Russia defeated Hitler and defeated Napoleon, and he regards Ukraine as the losers that have to pay a worse than Versailles, worse than the Germans in 1918 fee, effectively, for America being involved at all. And bearing in mind that presumably when America gave them the support for the last 2 years, it wasn't conditional on some sort of economic return, and Trump's making it that. And of course, we all have to pretend that Trump is great and everything is lovely and he's a four-dimensional chess player and transactional and all that stuff. But what do you make of the morality of what he's going to do with Ukraine?
The morality is terrible. This is the biggest concern of all. There is the meeting taking place in Saudi Arabia as we speak, actually, between Russian and American representatives. And there's a danger here of it being a kind of partition of Ukraine, of, okay, you, the Russians, you have 20% of Ukrainian territory, and we, the Americans, we are going to have half the mineral wealth. And all in a meeting where there aren't any Ukrainians. So this is absolutely the wrong way to conduct the affairs of the world. I think we should be in no doubt about that. And there is this, you're right to mention Versailles, because there's a great danger we see it all through history, that the way in which you settle one war can, if you're not careful, lead to a bigger war later, because it leaves both sides with an incentive to go back to fighting, a humiliated side that needs to recover its dignity and territory, and a victorious side that thinks it can come back for more. And so there's a huge danger of this here, that this is the prelude to a wider war in later years. And Trump and his team are not really showing the awareness of that. So that's the biggest worry in this whole thing.